Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and as you know, this is the show that digs deeper to understand what really matters most in business. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about something that certainly matters. That's talent strategy. And I'm pleased to welcome Jennifer Thornton, who's the founder and CEO of 304 Coaching, and she's also the host of the Let's Fix Leadership podcast. Hey, Jen, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thank you. It's going to be a fun conversation today.
Oh, I have no doubt about it. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Gosh, what all to share? So I got my start in the land of retail. I, as a young girl, loved to shop, and my dream was to work in the mall. And by gosh, my dreams came true. I got to work in the mall, and so that got my start in operations and learning how to lead teams, learning how to drive my business through teams at a very young age. You don't know what you're learning when you're young and starting out in your career, and then all of a sudden you mature and decades go by and you're like, oh, hey, that was something pretty exciting that I learned. And now I get to use it today. So, as time went on, I focused more on talent strategy, HR, both domestically and internationally. And then today I have the privilege of having my own business, and we do HR consulting and talent strategies for organizations. And it's just a fantastic ride.
Yeah, that's funny. Didn't everybody want to work at the mall when they were growing up? So all
I
your
hope
friends would come
so.
by and visit you and hang out. Yeah,
That's right.
that
Yeah, I know it
resonates.
was the cool thing.
Oh, for sure. Some folks are wondering, do people still go to malls anymore? I don't know. Some of them are. Some of them are still good. Some are not so much. Jen, before we dive into, we'll call it the topic of the day, I want to unpack your entrepreneurial journey. So what inspired you to leave the corporate world to do what you're doing now?
Oh gosh. It's interesting. You get to different like chapters in your life and you just have that itch that you need something different. And I'd had that itch for a while. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Um, I never imagined myself having my own business. It just seemed, too far out of reach. And then, just some things kind of fell in line around some, change in leadership where I worked, just kind of a different chapter in my life. And I knew that if I was going to try an entrepreneurial journey, I needed to do it at a time where I, had the confidence to do it. Let's face it, if you do this, sometimes you have a backup plan. I thought, well, I'm at an age where I can try it. If it doesn't work, the worst thing that's going to happen is I go get a job. I mean, that's the worst thing that could have happened to me, which is not a bad thing. And so it was just this moment where I was wanting to be very focused in what I was good at. I wanted to help people do those things. I could see the value of talent strategy. I'd seen the value for years in a corporate role. And I just thought, you know what? I want to do this all day, every day. And I'm just going to give it a try. And so that's what I did. I decided to start my own business. We started out as just executive coaching and executive development. And very quickly, it formed into what I do today. I was very fortunate that I always had a great network. I always took care of my network. I didn't realize I was taking care of my network. I focused on, friendships, and I focused on giving more than I got. I focused on helping people out. And it paid off because as soon as I started my business, executives I'd worked with in the past started knocking on my door. Hey, can you do this? Could you do that? I know we've done this in the past. I'd like to do it here. And so, you just start going, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have a business. And I think that's the joys of being an entrepreneur is some people think there's like this really straight roadmap. I'm going to do this, or this is my customer. And I, for a lack of a plan, gave me the ability to have some ambiguity. It gave me the ability to try new things or, say yes to things that if I had a really strict business plan, I probably would have said no to. And I'm so thankful for that. I'm so thankful I just said yes to things that came my way because eventually it became what I do.
Yeah, interesting. So many little mini lessons in there. So when you talk about taking care of your network and just creating more value and paying it forward and not really counting about what's coming back to you, that's one of the keys to success. I think it's a kind of the go-giver mindset. So I appreciate you sharing that. Lots to unpack there. I told the audience we're going to be talking about talent strategy. Let's define that. What is talent strategy?
So talent strategy is it's what happens to create that talent strategy. You have to look at your business plan, your business strategy. And so the talent strategy sets on top of your business strategy, and it is how you're actually going to accomplish your business goals through the talent that you hire, the talent that you contract, the talent that look at as, mentors, as a network. And it's really about saying, where am I going as a business? And to get there, what type of talent do I need? How do I attract this talent? How do I make this talent successful in my ecosystem? And what is that focus? And it's interesting when I'm talking to business owners, like, tell me about your business plan. And they always have a business plan, and they almost always have a financial budget with that plan. And I'm like, well, tell me about your talent plan. And they're like, well, I don't know. I don't have that. And I'm like, if you're a really strong CEO, one hand you take care of your money, and the other hand you take care of your talent. Because without money and talent, without a strict plan for both of those, you're going nowhere fast. And you have to have a plan to think about how you want to deliver these results, because it takes humans. Even in today's world, it takes humans to deliver these plans.
Yeah, as always, and you know my story. I believe that people are an organization's most valuable asset. Um, so figure out how to nurture them and get the most from them in a good way, because you're going to create a situation where they want to show up every day and do their best work for you.
Yeah.
There are folks today who would argue that the pendulum has sort of swung back in favor of the employer, if you will, after the Great Resignation, where employees seem to have leverage. Now there's a lot of talk about return to office and mandates and things like that. What's your general feel around the world of flexible work, and how people should be thinking about it from a leadership perspective? Because it feels to me like most employees want that, where they're able to actually do it. Obviously, on a production line, they can't.
Yeah. It's interesting. I always look at the evolution of leadership as social change. When you look at the history of leadership, we changed how we lead based on how the world changed. And the world has changed again. People are looking for more of a hybrid type situation, or more flexible schedule. And there's a lot of reasons why. One of the main reasons is, when I was growing up, you were told, leave it at the door. And you could leave it at the door, because I didn't bring my laptop and my cell phone home, because I didn't have those things back then. And then my works got left at the door. Well, that's no longer how it works. Everything has blended together, our work life, our personal life. And so it is a blend, it is a hybrid. And so when you start to look at how technology has changed how we interact as humans, we also have to think about, how do we create environments in which that's successful? It is different for every organization. Every organization has to really think about what's important to them and what is their talent strategy. And in that talent strategy, we have to decide what does the working environment look like? Is it 100% remote? Is it a hybrid? Is it certain days of the week? Is it 5 days a week in the office? Based on the work that you're doing and how that work is being looked at from a collaboration standpoint, it's different for everybody. And so I don't think there is a one size fits all, but it is part of a talent strategy, is making those decisions. And I always think about hiring, and again, every company has to hire for what's important to them. But a fully remote company sets so far on one side, they can hire the best person for the job anywhere in the country. A person or a company who is in office, if that's important to them, that's okay. But they have to hire someone, the best person that's willing to come to the office and willing to do the commute, whatever that commute is. And so you really think about your talent pool changing. And so it makes sense for some people, it doesn't for others. And that's why the talent strategy conversation is so important to have.
Yeah, great stuff there. And I personally believe that flexibility is the key. I think there may have been some, I'll call it distrust early on. What are people doing? But I think during the course of the pandemic, it came to light that if you actually trust your people and they're professional, they'll get stuff done. I mean, I've seen some of the oldest school industries, like investment bankers, who are all adamant about being in the office for FaceTime, nonetheless. And they're suddenly having to adjust to their younger employees zooming in from Florida, for example, and
Yeah,
they're getting stuff done. So
they
I
are.
think that the hybrid is the way to go. I do think it's important to be in the office from time to time, because building the personal bonds helps you create that culture. But you're absolutely right. If you can hire somebody from around the globe to be best fit, that certainly is beneficial. And let's expand on that just a little bit more. When you talk about the best fit, there's been in Good to Great, they talk about the right people in the right seat.
Yeah.
And how do you begin to think about right people, right seat when you start to think about all of the potential characteristics that a particular role may have? Not everybody is going to necessarily check every box. So how do we think about that?
So we start to think about company culture. That's the foundation of a talent strategy is the company culture because when you start to think about not only the work you need done, but how you want the work done, because that's culture, is how we actually do the work. That's the most important foundation because when you have that, you can start to think about does this person not only have the skill sets, but will those skill sets thrive in our ecosystem? And that is a culture, is an ecosystem, and some are healthier than others. I always think of a culture as every time you hire someone, it's like getting a little goldfish. You know how you get it and it's in its bag and then you let it kind of settle into your tank and it gets used to it and then it thrives. And that's the culture. It's a healthy. And so you kind of get in, you get used to it, you onboard, and then you thrive. And so you have to have a strong culture and you have to have consistency of that culture. It cannot be words on a poster in a break room. It has to be into everything we do. And then once you know that, the second piece that's incredibly important is org design. And I think people don't look at that as important as it is, especially if you're like really big companies talk about it all the time because they're employing tens of hundreds of thousands of people. But when you think about even an organization at 30, 50, 100 people, you have to have really great org design at that level too, because then you're starting to say what at work actually impacts my business. And that's the work I'm going to do. Why are we doing all this work that doesn't impact our business? You start to think about how those jobs intersect so that people are able to collaborate and not step on each other's toes or have really some strong clarity on what each job does. They have to weave together. And what happens so often is people just like, oh, someone's overwhelmed, hire someone to help them. Or we need, this person to figure out this big picture, but then we didn't hire anyone to actually do the work. Like there's all this messiness and we start throwing payroll at our problems without org design. And in today's world, you can get so creative with org design because you can bring in fractional leaders, you can bring in 1099, you can bring in small companies, you can start to look at what's your single point of failure and how do we, remove those, because in a mid-sized business, you'll have some single points of failure and that's pretty scary. And so you can start to get really creative on not only what work needs to be done, but how do you do that work? And if you have a really strong foundation and culture, and then you have a lot of clarity on the work that needs to be done, then you can start to think about, okay, now who am I actually going to hire? And too often without that talent strategy, you jump to who's the right person in the right seat. Well, you've got to do the work to make that decision. You've got to do the work to figure that out.
Yeah. Tell us what you mean when you say a single point of failure.
So oftentimes we may have a job and only one person in the company does that. And that person goes on vacation and it gets behind, or that person decides to leave the organization and no one knows how to do what they did. Sometimes people don't even know what they did. You ever have someone leave and then you're like, why isn't this happening? You're like, oh,
Oh,
so-and-so
yeah.
did that. They're like, well, why didn't we know? Well, you should have probably, again, did some really good org design and know who does what on your team. But that's what happens. And so when you have a single point of failure in an organization, when that person's on vacation or has to take a leave of absence or leaves the organization, you have critical work that's not being done. And then that is it's like throwing a rock in a river. You think, oh, well, it's just for a little while. We're not going to do that work. But chances are there's ripple effects. There's someone else that impacts. There's something that slows down. All of a sudden you wake up 3 months later and something, is way behind and no one knew because that single point of failure left.
Yeah, and that's one of the hidden costs of turnover, right? When you think about that
Mhm.
single point of failure person departing, all the institutional knowledge that they've accumulated, even if they've written down policies, processes, procedures, what have you, it's the stuff in their head that they do day to day just by muscle memory that walks out the door and you can't recreate that easily.
Yeah.
Jen, you talk about something called the talent cliff. What is that?
Oh, the talent cliff. I love talking about the talent cliff because I want to keep all of us at the top of the cliff and not off the cliff. But the talent cliff is really this idea of how to kind of visualize what happens in fast growing organizations. When someone starts an organization, they have a great idea for a product or a service, and they start to build that. And typically, the skill set of those leading the team is greater than what is needed to actually run the business. And that's how you create that momentum, because the leaders with their skill set are pulling the business quickly. They're pulling it up that cliff, and it's really starting to gain momentum. And when it starts to gain momentum, what happens is oftentimes we're really doubling down on that service or that product. We are out there getting new customers. We're out there doing all of the work, but we typically don't have a talent strategy. So what's happening is that business is growing faster than the skill set of the people running the business. And then one day you wake up and the business feels out of control. The business feels like you're just like holding on for dear life because it's outgrown the skill set. And when that starts to happen, leaders start to react. They start leading from fear because they are in fear, because the business is hard to hold on to, because it's taken off. And when that happens, some of your best performers are always the first to leave because they don't want to be led in negativity. They don't want to be micromanaged. They don't want to be managed in chaos. So they're the first to go off your cliff. They're like, see you later. And you're left with typically your mid to bottom performers. They're more likely to just say, okay. And then the business starts to outpace and outrun everyone in the building. And then right behind that, your business is off the cliff and you no longer can sustain what you built. And that is the scary part of not having a talent strategy. If you do not have a strategy to keep the skill set of your leaders ahead of what you need to run your business, then eventually that business will run over you.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you right here and right now, what can leaders do who are just leaning into their car speakers, for instance, wondering like, what do I do to keep these A players on the team? How do we avoid that jumping off the cliff?
You partner with a really good leadership education coach, someone who is able to come in and look at that talent strategy. You need a talent strategy. You got to make sure that you're building into the growth through who you're hiring, the org design. You start to say, okay, this is an outside or outsourced department, but at 200 million, we're going to bring 4 people in, and here's how we're going to look at that. And so it's the piece of the talent strategy is that development. It is having really strong, mentally strong, high resilient leaders, having them with their own development coach, allowing them to have that time to clear their head, focus, think, and then making sure that you're also doing executive alignment. That's a big piece of it, having executive alignment, team development, team coaching. But you have to put as much work into the leaders of an organization than you're putting into your widget, or it just doesn't come together. And we've seen that time and time and time in history. You can think about great companies that just shot up, and then you kind of watch those executives fumble and fight over things, and things got a little wobbly, and then all of a sudden no one can get control of it again. And that's what happens without a really good talent strategy and without a focus on development of your team. No matter where your team or where your company is in its growth pattern, you'll never, ever waste a dollar if you're investing in the growth of the individuals who run your team.
Yeah, continue to preach, Jen. Love that stuff. So in your day to day in working with execs, you're also working with the next generation leaders, if you will, the up and coming rising stars. What are some of the themes that you see, maybe even in a compare and contrast between the challenges that the established execs may have vis-a-vis some of the rising stars?
Oh, I love that question. It's such a fun question to think about because there is some real differences. You have a experienced executive. You know, if you've seen 100 problems, you understand that some problems are different sizes, and some problems are just like something that just happens, and the next one's like, oh no, we have to really work on this. So that's one of the things with new leaders is they get very like every problem, even if it's a tiny problem, is the first problem they've dealt with at that level. So it's big to them. And so when you're able to help those newer or junior level leaders start to work on their mental resilience, starting to work from a place of creative leadership and not reactive leadership, you're really helping them start to make really strong clarity decisions not out of fear, but out of focus. And that is one of the biggest differences. And it's always so frustrating when I hear like a very experienced person go, I don't know why they're freaking out. And I'm like, you were probably freaking out 20 years ago too, when the first time this happened. And so as a leader, if we don't understand where they are, if we don't understand their journey and allowing them to go on that journey with support versus judgment, it's really hard for them to grow, because if you're judging how they're responding to some of these first time experiences, you're building more fear in them. Oh, now I shouldn't have been upset. Why am I upset? Now I'm upset because they're upset and I have a problem I don't know how to fix and they won't help me because I should know. And so it's interesting watching very experienced leaders and newer leaders start to interact with each other. But when you can bridge that gap, it is incredible, because it comes from this place of, hey, we've all been there. Let me help you get through this, versus you should know better. And why didn't you, wake up as a manager on day one and someone like put a computer chip in your head and you knew how to handle everything. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to watch. There's several companies I've worked with for years. And one of the things we do is, as soon as someone is onboarded to the organization, if they're a leader, I work directly with them to get them settled in, learn, and really learn how to kind of function in that ecosystem and that culture. And then as soon as we hire someone, those first 6 months, I'm working with them, sometimes even just, 15, 30 minutes once a week, because I'm like, what's going on in your calendar day? Who do you need to be in that meeting? And starting to help them really form who they are as a leader. And that type of work makes such a difference. And you can, again, keep people from falling off that cliff.
Yeah, and it all starts with the leadership at the top, the seasoned folks. There was an interesting stat that I saw some time ago. I mentioned it in my first book, something to the effect of that people become leaders or managers at around the age of 30, and they get
Mhm.
their first actual leadership training or management training at age 41.
I
So
love
they've
that.
got a decade of flailing around trying to
Yeah.
figure it out, and basically trying to model their leadership
Mhm.
behavior after the people that they work for and work with.
Mhm.
And if the role models are not great leaders, then you're just creating a next generation of more crappy leaders.
Yeah. And when that happens, you're also modeling a leadership style in a certain time and period in our social history. And so, I hear people complain all the time, well, that new generation, they're just young and they don't know, they don't work hard enough. I hear all of that. And I'm like, no, no. Social changes creates different needs, creates different ways of viewing things. Just like if you look back into the early 1900s, into the 30s, when we had unions come on, it's because of the working conditions and people were, it was dangerous. And so we had unions come on. And then we had, word processors, typewriters started to advance, and that looked different. War, where women really started to enter the workplace, and that changed things. There's just all these social changes that happen. And if we're only modeling who's been before us, we're learning a lot of great things. But we also have to understand how to adapt to today's environment and be prepared to whatever it's going to look like 10 years from now. We're sitting here on this podcast. We may look back on this episode and go, wow, why did we have that view? It's because we know what we know today, and the world will continue to change. And as leaders, we have to really be stewards of social change, of understanding how the world is changing, so that we can create productive work environments inside of that, because the world is always going to be evolving, and you can fight it and deal with that, or you can understand it and take what's great about it and double down on it and create an incredible work environment and great results.
Yeah, and one of the things that you alluded to briefly in earlier part of this conversation was the word mentor. And for these aspiring leaders, having mentors is so important, because it's more than just modeling what they see, but it's getting
Mhm.
different perspectives from other people, not even inside their own organization.
Mhm.
Which gives me this segue here. I want to ask you to talk about your podcast, Jen. It's called Let's Fix Leadership. So first of all, it implies leadership is broken. So I want to understand that. We've talked about a few pieces here, but tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about the podcast and what people can learn from it and where they can find it.
So the podcast Let's Fix Leadership came from this idea that leadership is always evolving. And so it's never fixed. And so it's a play on words of this idea of, hey, if we think that we're on it and we know it all, then we know nothing. And so if that title works today, and that title is going to work 10 years from now. And what I try to do with the podcast and where I focus is really some micro tools and micro ideas around not only talent strategy, but also leading in today's world. One of the things we do on the podcast, which I think is a lot of fun because I'm a little bit of a nerd, is I like to go out and rewrite leadership competencies because they're very rarely updated and you're trying to use outdated competencies in today's world. And so I spend time thinking about what are the competencies we need for tomorrow and different things like that. And most of them are under, 8 to 10 minutes. And so there's just these great little micro learnings that you can practice as soon as you finish listening.
Nice. I'd love to explore, if you can, maybe share a story or two, an example, a case study, whatever the terminology is that resonates, but some results that you've gotten for organizations by implementing the appropriate talent strategies.
So there is a great case study. In fact, this week makes 5 years I've worked with this organization. And when I started with this organization, they were around 4 million. They're around 100 million today. So in 5 years, they went from 4 to 100.
Wow.
And I think anyone would take those business results any day of
All
the
day
week.
long. Right.
All day, every day. And sky's the limit for them. They have an incredible concept. They've gone into a kind of an outdated industry and brought technology to it. And so it's just been incredible. So I started working with them again at the very onset. And so we started with culture. A fun fact, they signed the contract the week before COVID hit. And so I gave them an out and I'm like, this is, it's cost, it's investment of time. You're trying to keep your company afloat. And they said, if we don't do this culture work and the talent strategy now, we won't be able to come out of COVID strong. And so they understood from day one, this work is foundational work that helps you. And so while everyone was shut down and doing nothing, I was on the phone with that leadership team and we were building the culture. We were deciding how we were going to work. We did a ton of work and research into org design. And we got super creative with the org design around consultants and fractional and things like that. And we worked towards it. The org design we created didn't happen overnight. It was a 3 to 5 year plan. And right now, guess what we're doing? We're 5 years in and we are totally starting with a white piece of paper because what it took to get to 100 million will look very different of what it's going to take to get to 500 million or above. And so it's an org design that we'll start to move towards. And, every time we build a department, we're like, okay, does this give us flexibility and growth? What might break? What do we invest in now because it gives us a foundation for our growth? And so we're in that process. And I work with the ELT, and I meet every single week and talk about what's going on in the business, talk about how they're approaching it. And I also work with every one of their new hires and everyone who gets promoted. And so they spend a lot of time investing into the talent. And you can't say that it didn't work. I mean, 4 million to 100 million in 5 years. I think that was
You're
worth
doing
their
something right.
resources.
Yeah. And just a definition and terminology, ELT, I'm assuming that's executive leadership team.
Yes. Their executive leadership team. Yes.
There you go. And you talk about the importance of culture. Anybody who's listened to my program before knows I'm all about that and connecting the dots between leadership and culture and enterprise value. And it is all connected and it is so important. Jen, unfortunately, we're like out of time here. It went really, really quickly here, but I
It
really
did.
enjoyed this conversation with you. Before you have to go, though, do tell the audience how they can find you, how they can connect with you, work with you, learn more about you.
So you can find me on LinkedIn at Jen Thornton and I'd love to connect with you there. You can also find me on my website at 304coaching.com.
That's awesome. Jen, thanks so much for spending some time with us today on Behind the Numbers.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you out there for your support of this program. Truly appreciate it. We can't do this show without you. So thank you again, gang, for being a big fan and supporter of this program. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and I'm known as an expert in business valuation. If you're a business owner and you don't know what your company is worth, we should probably have a conversation. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat. That's all we have for today, folks. We'll see you next time on Behind the Numbers. Take care.